Hey Ali, can you see me?
Oh, yes, no, indeed, I can see you.
Well, I'm ready. Can you hear me?
Great. Yes, I can hear you perfectly fine. I'll be, we'll be starting in about 7, 8 minutes.
Take your time. It will be nice if you can change my full name. I think that you know how to write it.
I know.
Look here, my name is Nug.
But I can't do that. Only you can do it.
I think that's, yeah.
There should be an option, rename.
Okay, I will. I'm doing it right now.
Oh, I can do that. I can do that for you.
It's done. It's done.
Okay.
Yep, I think that's Tasneem or Tansim. When she sent the email, she sent it by putting my name as Nug, by the way. No worries, no worries. No, it happens, it happens. But the Prophet Nuh won't be happy if we call him Nug.
I'm sure. Yeah. He
no
will
worries,
not.
No worries. Cool. So, as I told you, we are in the middle of the Arab Liberty Festival. We had to change the dates because we want to do it. We want to do it in present, live and real. But unfortunately, we have a lot of problems. We had to do it virtual. So, I was in front of a paradox. To be in the Arab Liberty Festival or to be with you, I decided to be in both Arab Liberty Festival and with you. So this is why I cannot stay that much for the questions and answers, my friend.
I understand that. What I will do is when we start formally, I will start with your presentation.
Yep.
But then I will request you to hang on for a few minutes for like a couple of question answers, and then I will. Then you can sign off.
Good. Perfect.
And we'll continue with the webinar.
Sounds good to me. Sounds good to me. I have quite 15 minutes for my presentation, between 15 and 20 minutes for my presentation.
Great.
Does it sound good to you?
Great. And you will be, yes, it sounds good.
Yeah. I won't use PowerPoint.
Oh, okay, that's fine. It's up to you. We'll do that.
So I'm here. Just forget about me. Do whatever you want. I'm just here waiting for you to signal to start.
Yeah.
Salman, hi.
Oh, hello, Riyadh. Good to see you
Hi.
here.
Thanks. Because I have registered with my mobile, it seems that is not letting me to come with my computer. Or I need to register again from the computer?
You are now it's the same registration if you access it from your laptop. It should be still okay.
Okay, let me search. Oh, he's asking for registration. Let me do it again.
Okay.
So because when she asked me to register, I have done it through my mobile, but now I want to enter through computer. He's not letting me in. Okay, give me 1 second only. I will fill up and I see how it looks like.
Okay.
Then I will have two. If any, just in any case.
I think you can still continue, or you want to share the presentation.
Yeah, I want to just to share the presentation. In any case, I can read from my laptop and
Okay.
it will be all right, because now we are in the end of the day. Normally the employee has left.
Sure.
Okay. Hello? Okay.
Yes, we are.
Oh, still I'm using the, okay. Okay. Now I'm from the, I think I'm good now. You hear me?
Hello,
Hello.
I'm speaking.
Yes, Ayman, welcome.
Ayman.
Okay. Can you see me?
Yes, I
we
can see you. We can see you.
I'm just leaving my
Is the
the
picture-
webinar from the mobile, so it will be much better.
Sorry, I did not hear you. Can you say that again?
No, because I was using also my mobile. Now I am out from the mobile, and only I'm using the laptop to share something.
Okay.
كيف حالك أستاذ نوح؟
بخير الأخ العزيز حاوي. I'm doing well. How about
Very
you?
good, very good. Alhamdulillah.
Cool.
I am close now. Close. I am between Pakistan and Algeria now. I am in Djibouti.
Cool, cool. Okay, so I'm glad to meet you for the first time, and definitely we will after the COVID we will definitely meet in real. Let's finger crossed.
Inshallah, inshallah.
Inshallah.
All right, friends, this is Ali Salman, your host today. My colleague Tasneem would not be joining because she has been called by her university for some makeup classes. Great to see all of you. Now, we are starting the webinar in a couple of minutes formally. We are, in fact, already on the Facebook Live of Islam and Liberty Network Facebook page. And today, we are organizing our first webinar or online meeting in this manner. So I hope that technically it goes all well. We'll be joining by attendees from various countries. So I welcome them. I can see many of them have joined from different countries and different time zones, from west to east. And I hope that it is comfortable for most of them. So thank you, friends, for joining. In today's webinar or online conference of Islam and Liberty Network, we will be talking about the economic challenges faced by particularly three countries after the Arab Spring, namely Tunisia, Morocco, and Algeria. As we all know that these countries and other countries in the region have gone through different stages of political and democratic transition. Each has a unique case, perhaps, so it's not easy to compare. But I think what is perhaps common across the region is the economic challenges being faced by the population of these countries, whether it is issues of job, economic growth, or investment or trade. I think there are challenges. And particularly when we were discussing this in the case of Tunisia, for instance, which happened to be celebrating 10th year of the Arab Spring, we realized that many of the reforms which were expected to bring more prosperity for the people after a democratic regime have not been realized so far. So we wanted to take a broader look at what's happening in other countries. And so we thought that today we shall convene this discussion. I'm very happy that we are finally being able to hold this webinar. I'm going to make a quick introduction. Yes, too?
Sorry to interrupt you. Before you start the conference formally, I would like to draw your attention to something peculiar. In 80 minutes exactly, my internet connection will disappear for 3 or 4 minutes. So I will be absent. Then I'll come back for technical reasons. I wanted to tell you that, so you can receive me back when I enter again.
Great, that's fine, Ayman. But thank you for alerting us to that technical. Looking forward to your inputs. So this panel is quite unique in the sense that we have 3 countries and 3 experts here. We'll be starting from Morocco, Dr. Nuh Al-Harmouzi, who is a professor of economics at Ibn Tufayl University and also director of Arab Center. And grateful that he has taken also time because he's also busy in organizing and running Arab Liberty Festival. He's part of the Island Council, And so because he is also engaged in this festival, so he'll be speaking first, and followed up by a couple of questions. Then he will excuse, and then we'll continue with the other two speakers here. Riyad Habi, our friend from Algeria. He wears two hats. One, he's primarily a businessman, come from a private sector, but also is associated and co-founder of Hayek Center in Algeria, and busy in also creating some intellectual movement there. And then our third speaker today is Dr. Ayman Bughanami from Tunisia. Is a professor of English and political economy, and he is also our fellow in Tunisia, and we'll be hearing from him the case of the economy from a Tunisian perspective. So each of the speaker will be addressing this webinar for about 15 to 20 minutes, and we will have a quick question and answer sessions after they have done. But in case of Dr. Nou's presentation, we'll have a brief question and answers immediately after his presentation. So with that, I think we can start without further ado with the presentation or remarks from Dr. Nou Al-Hormozi. Over to you, Nou.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ali. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go on.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you for the great work of the Islam and Liberty Network. I'm delighted. I'm happy. I'm honored and humbled to be with this panel of great speakers, and with Riyad Hawi and with Ayman. So I had the occasion to listen to them, and this is a great opportunity to talk with them in this panel today. So I will try to talk about the situation of Morocco and to present to your to present to you today my take, my input about the situation. About the evolution of the situation in Morocco after the so-called Arab Spring. And from our perspective, from classical liberal perspective, I will try to identify some dysfunctional elements and to suggest a solution. So I will present quickly the case of Morocco, and I will answer to some questions later on. So the case in Morocco, we definitely had, like the other countries, our Arab Spring, but we have kind of specific Arab Spring. On February 20th, we have here in Morocco the movement of 20 Février, or the movement of February 20 in 2011. This movement was inspired by the Arab Spring waves. So thousands of Moroccans, they went into the street, they rioted in Rabat in protest that lasted until spring of 2012. So they demanded an end to corruption, change in government, better housing, employment, better living conditions, and above all, a change in the constitutions. So finally, this protest successfully ushered in a new constitutions, now known as what we call here in Morocco, the 2011 constitution. So the first question is, what happened to this movement asking for reforms? So the movement 20 February message later on became quite inconsistent and less relevant when the king of Morocco kind of responded to demand with some reforms. Moreover, the movement, or 20 February movement, become gradually and increasingly incompatible with Moroccan perceptions, as the movement image became framed as an extreme and composed of fringe group that hoped for radical and revolutionary change. So the movement gradually declined after the change occurred in the political environment. In addition to this, we must say it's kind of preparation along with smear campaigns against the members of the movements. So in the end, they were divided. So two elements. The first is they appear to be totally at odds on the reality of Morocco. So a lot of people, they perceive them as radicals or asking for revolutionary changes, the first. Second, the regime persecutes some of them, etc. And this is why gradually the movement disappeared, and today it's quite insignificant. So how Moroccan situation, mainly economical and social situation, evolved during the last decade, what we can call in many countries the lost decade. So how this movement asking for reforms impacts the situation. So we can see the cup from the first, the empty half or the full half. So I will try, I will in the beginning talk about the full half. So some real and encouraging achievements realized in this in the last 10 years after many reforms. So many macroeconomics and social indicators, they show kind of an improved socioeconomic landscape. In Morocco, after the Arab Spring, I will just present a few examples. An increase of per capita income in the country. Exports in Morocco, they increased. The poverty headcount ratio at the national poverty line decreased. Life expectancy increased. Employment decreased to, so now with the figures, the official figures are 9% in 2009. We witness also the growth of specific industries like automotive and aerospace and real infrastructural development in Morocco. Morocco also engaged in strategy to move to high-end markets and diversify industrial production. Also, Morocco has also progressed in its doing business on environments, moving up 9 places in 2019, doing business ranking to 16th place out of 190 economies, if we compare that to the previous years, and up from a ranking of 129 in 2009. So huge steps and huge improvements, reflecting many years of serious reforms. So this is the full part of the cup. So these are the strengths, these are the good points, but still Morocco is a developing country. So we are facing the reforms we are facing, they have many limits and many challenges. So what are the current challenges? So nearly a quarter of Moroccans are poor or at risk of poverty. And the gap between the highest and the lowest socioeconomic classes is wide. So we have a huge disparity and huge and great inequality in Morocco. Morocco's Gini index is nearly 40.9%. While poverty has decreased countrywide, it's still prevalent in rural areas. So, in addition to that, the Moroccan economy still fragile, largely dependent on agricultural activities, which makes this agriculture vulnerable to poor harvests and environmental shocks. So I just want to stress few or to give to your audience a few numbers. We depend here in Morocco on the performance of the agricultural sector. 40% 40% of our GDP is from the agricultural sector, and the agriculture in Morocco, it's employ nearly 40% or 50% of the population. And we depend a lot on the climate and water vulnerability. And we know that we have what we call in French stress hydrique. We have a huge risk on water here in Morocco and availability of water. As well, our agriculture depends a lot on our trade with European Union. So another challenge, another big challenge in Morocco is youth unemployment, which present problem after the reform, even after the reform, is still a present problem in Morocco. And it's around 16 or 17% of the population. And this problem, we face it more in the case of the youth employment, and we have here in Morocco 22% of youth nationally employed, and nearly 40% of youth in the urban areas are not employed. So you can imagine that half of the urban population is not employed. This is a very pressing problem in Morocco. After the COVID, before and after the COVID, and despite of these reforms in Morocco, the debt is very high. We have twin deficits, etc. Here in Morocco, after the reform, we still face competition of countries like such as Turkey or Egypt, and we have a very still weak productivity and low competitiveness of the Moroccan entrepreneurs. So I want to stress also two paradoxes here in Morocco. The first one, that's Morocco, we have the highest rate of investments in the world. So we have nearly 32% of the GDP as public and private investments, but the growth rate does not follow this big investment. So the growth rate remains below expectations and is unfortunately still driven by private and public consumption. So a lot of investment, but with a very weak impact, private and public. This is one of the biggest paradox of Morocco. The second big paradox that I want to present to your audience is that the private sector here in Morocco does not have enough dynamic and lack small and medium-sized enterprises. We call here in Morocco, we call it the missing middle. So we don't have enough small and medium enterprise, which is, and we know that this missing middle of the private sector, that trend to show the greatest innovation in other countries. The rest of the economy is made of suboptimal firms with unproductive activities, often the informal sector, and characterized by low profits. But despite the progress, or very big enterprise or state-owned enterprise, despite the progress made, significant development and challenges they remain, and only stronger private sector driving growth will be able to address them. So after the reform, the question is how to move from what we call here in the Arab Center a very limited liberalization, or facade liberalization in facade, external liberalization, which is unfortunately the reality of the recent reform in Morocco, to real and deep reforms and changes. So mainly after the outbreak of the COVID pandemic and its nefast economic impact, the COVID will definitely exacerbate Moroccan's economic hardship. So what is needed right now, and very quickly, taking into consideration the huge debt of the Moroccan economy and taking into consideration our limited resources, we urgently need a strong private sector. And when we call about strong private sector, we think about reforms, and I will talk about the reforms needed here in Morocco and do some focus and talk a little bit about this private sector. So here in Morocco, we need to create a conducive environment for enterprises to enter to market, to grow and to export. It will require a more level playing field in terms of competition. This is one of the biggest problems. High quality human capital and skills to meet the demand of the modern workforce and foster entrepreneurship, better access to finance for small firms and startups across their life cycle, as well as supportive institutions. In the private sphere in Morocco, and this is the anatomy of the private sphere, economic activity seems to have been driven mostly by established, often well-connected firms here in Morocco, not by young firms. These very well-connected firms and established firms invest mainly in non-tradable sectors that are less exposed to competitions, like real estate and constructions. Other than foreign direct investments-led firms located in the few free zones here in Morocco, the young or the small, very small firms have not overall successfully competed with established and well-connected firms or generated significant employment. So this is the reality, and in spite of what was done to enhance the market contestability and competition here in the Morocco, private sector still very weak and not able to create a job, and we are in urgently need of this private sector. And as I said in the beginning, the most important is market are contestable and level playing field for all market players is essential to foster the market competition. So I will suggest five solutions to foster the private sector in Morocco. Some of them, they are reforms happening, but the majority, Morocco still need to work more on that to be able to have this strong private sector, to be able to tackle the urgent and pressure issues that we will face after the coronavirus. So the first reform need to tackle the judicial system. So our Moroccan judicial system is considered extremely burdensome in terms of contract execution. So very long time frames and very high numbers of procedures, etc. And insolvency settlements costs are also considered extremely high. We need more simplification here in Morocco of procedures and the establishment of new and specialized courts. This is the first recommendation. The second recommendation, the land tenure is considered as major obstacle to private investment in Morocco. The problem of land access discourage national and foreign investors. It's urgent to reform and modernize certain aspects of this sector's regulatory and institutional framework. The third point in our opinion, that need to be tackled is the Moroccan taxation system. We know that in practice, Moroccan taxation system has been permanently under reforms since the mid-80s, but made by various budget laws have made the tax system less transparent and extremely complex. The fourth point is the governance issue. Corruption and crony capitalism, it's a major challenge for the Moroccan authorities. The last point is the rigidity of labor code. So it makes it extremely complex to hire people. So more dynamic private sector operating under conditions of greater market contestability is extremely important, and to create dynamic of growth and tackling the economic hardship that is facing the Moroccan economy lately. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Noor. I think this was a very illuminating, very enlightening talk from you about Moroccan economy and challenges in particular. And you also have highlighted solutions. You have highlighted market and private sector needs to have more space. Also, what kind of reforms are needed, especially in the contract enforcement and then taxation system. Very important points. I think I already have a couple of questions here in Q&A, and I'll read out these questions to you. So one is more general question, and I believe that this question will be addressed by other speakers on their turn. That is, do you think Arab Spring was the right way to get positive change in Arab life politically and economically? So that's the first question. So I will request you to answer. And second question is specific to Morocco, asked by Muhammad Amin. The question is, in Morocco, what percentage of the economy is in the private sector, and what percentage is owned by the government or the royal family? You already addressed private sector role, but maybe you can address some specific numbers if it is possible. So I have these two questions, and also if there are any other attendees or participants who want to speak, they can raise their hand by using the function here on the Zoom, and I will also allow them to speak. But we have these two questions for you, No.
Okay, good. It's I don't know if I can answer to these two questions, but I will try. Do I think that it was a good idea to do this Arab Spring? So now, after 10 years of the outbreak of the Arab Spring, everybody is talking about the failure of the Arab Spring, except of the case of Tunisia, which is not a success, but not a failure because it's still undergoing. So I'm not sure if the situation was better. So we can talk about economically and about the stability before the Arab Spring, because a lot of people, they said, okay, the situation was better in the Arab world before the Arab Spring, and we had security and stability. So I liked a lot the answer of a Tunisian friend who told me, look, even the donkeys, they were better off there before the Arab Spring. And they had security and everything was fine for the donkeys and for the dogs. So frankly, do we need reforms in this region? Yes. How to reform? I think I am more in favor of gradual, incremental reforms, because now of the benefits of the history, I can see that in Libya, in Tunisia, even in Syria, and the majority of the Arab country, Arab Spring countries, the situation, the economical and the political and even the social situation is worst. But that was the case of France. That was the case of UK. We need to keep in mind that we had to wait nearly 400 years before being able to vote and in universal elections in UK after the big revolution, the glorious revolution in UK, in French also. So per definition, the big changes, economic, political, and social changes, they take time. And in the aftermath of revolutions, the situation is extremely hard, and the transition is extremely hard. If we don't draw lessons from our failures, I think that the situation will be dramatic. But I think that the Arab people, they did well to ask for reforms. We need to make sure that we are agree on what we want as alternative, but I don't buy the arguments that the situation was better under Hosni Mubarak and under Al-Qaddafi, and the situation was better under Bouteflika, etc. I don't think so. Maybe the insider, maybe the rich part of the population, the situation was better, but for large parts of the population, the situation was extremely hard and still extremely hard in many countries. This is the first question. The second question, we officially don't have these figures about the part of the private sector and the public sector and the part of the king in the private sector. So we don't have transparent informations, and these are confidential information. We don't have access to these informations. What we know, I don't want to go into speculations, that 50% on the investment of the Moroccan investment is public investment, and 50% of the investment is private investment, and it's decreasing. So now we have more of public investment, which is not good. And this is why we are suggesting that, look, guys, after the outbreak and after the coronavirus, the state will be extremely weak. It's very big and will be extremely weak, and the debt will increase. So this is why we need to encourage private sector and investment to private sector, because investment to private sector creates a job without increasing taxes.
Thank you, Nu. Earlier, I saw Abu Murad raising his hand. Is there still a question? All right. I don't think so. The question is there.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any questions for our speaker from other panelists before he signs off, Riyad or Ayman?
Just if I want to add something.
Please.
I think most of those country and most of the independent country actually, they have followed the socialist policy, and they have followed the heavy statism and heavy interventionism. And maybe for us North African, since our model is a bit a copy from the French model, we have a double problem: the socialism in the roots, and the statism, the French statism, bureaucracy also, which bring things to the heart. So I think most of the problems are the same. Although I believe maybe Tunisia, with this new coalition and a new political party in the helm of the power, they are trying to liberalize a little bit. But still the old left and opposition and people who are in statehood are a bit freezing things, is not moving in the right direction. But generally, there is a new mood, and this is most important, that the discourse of in the media, and especially in Facebook, maybe from our experience in Algeria, we feel that there is new discourse coming, and new generation and new intellectual and new economists are trying to advocate new idea and bringing new type of explanation for the situation. So I think that things, like you say, Mr. Harmouzi, need to mature, because Germany or France or UK, it didn't happen, and even in US, it didn't happen in one day. So people, they have experiment, and sometimes even they advance a little bit. There is a return back to square one, like what is happening in US. So things is not that easy. And we are hoping, of course, we are hoping that the new regime in those, in Algeria and in Tunisia and Morocco understand a bit that the state is not a player in economy, must be an arbiter, must be a referee. Thank you.
Thank you, Riyadh. Do you wish to comment on that, No?
I totally agree with my friend Riyadh on his analysis and diagnostic.
Okay, great. So I think then we can move on. Thank you so much, Nu, for joining. Yeah, we'll continue the webinar. Okay, now, well, I think we can start talking about Algeria. Our friend Riyadh, who was just speaking, I would like to request him to share his thoughts on the subject, economy after Arab Spring. Over to you, Riyadh.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Islam and Liberty Network for the opportunity to participate in this event, along with other speakers like Mr. Harmouzi and Mr. Ayman and Mr. Salman, to exchange idea and widen our view from different experience, especially for this three neighbor and very close population, actually, between Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. We feel that we are one country in three different states. So our problems are almost the same, if I understand better the situation in both Morocco and Tunisia. So my talk will be about Algeria. Starting from the Arab Spring, maybe Algeria didn't join the first wave in the same intensity like Tunisia or Morocco. Although the regime had tried to make some changes. But the Algerian popular movement came a few years later when the previous president, a sick man, an old man, and unfit to become a president and to continue as a president, want to be re-elected. So Algerians come to the street by millions in 2019. And from that day, it was also the same, like I think the same like Morocco. It started in 22nd Friday, 22nd February. So we enter a new era of what it become called in the media Hirak movement. So people every weekend, they will come to the street by millions. So maybe I will try to share some presentation here from application. Okay, I have here. I hope is clear my presentation. Mr. Salman?
Yes, it is clear. Yes, it is clear.
Okay. So Okay, I will use this one. So you know that the modern politics is actually a continuity of people are seeking better situation. They evaluate, of course, the development and the economic policy. This, I mean, this is politics. Politics is 100% related to the economic situation of any country. Whenever the situation, economic situation, is not good, people they start question the policies. They start question the ability and the quality of people in the regime. So if from Tunisian, the merchant who toppled a dictator because of this, the Bouazizi torch, and from that point we started what we call the Arab Spring. But Algeria actually avoided the first wave of the Arab Spring, of the first popular movement, which happened in Tunisia, in Morocco, in Libya after that, and in other countries. So on that time, the rise of oil price brings almost Algeria to very high reserve of hard currency, up to 180 billion, and maybe more, also around 220 billion in that time. So the regime was able to create a little bit of bias on social peace and inhibit any social and economic demands to become, to transfer to become political demands. So the regime in that time, in that period of time, when he saw that things are very hot in Tunisia, in Morocco, in Egypt, in other countries, he started a little bit of superficial political reform. But it was a deterioration of political representation. So people, they don't trust anymore the political party and the representation. So Algeria, it was a little bit pacified in that period of time. But few years later, millions of Algerian people come to the street. And because, as I say, a sick and old president want to be re-elected in an unconstitutional situation, and the economic was very bad, was not that good, unfortunately, high unemployment, decrease of living standard, concentration of wealth in the hand of bureaucrats and handy, what we call clients to the regime, businessmen who are like parasite, and all their activity is part of the government activity. So people come to the street by millions. And what characterized Hirak, it was a general pacific revolt, not sectarian, not partisan, not of the union. Everybody was outside and looking for change. Of course, the role of the social media like Facebook and YouTube has played a great role to bring people together and to create a uniform message. So the civilian action was on a weekly basis, millions of protests and demonstration asking for change and refusing the statu quo of the situation. There is no leadership, there is no representation, but everybody was outside. So here, like what happened in Tunisia, and maybe something almost similar happened also in Morocco. In Tunisia, of course, in Morocco, the king has played a role to make some changes. So in Tunisia and same like in Algeria, the army has played a role because the new international climate is against any form of oppression or brutality. And the information was instant, thanks to Facebook, thanks to all these social media platforms. And the most important things, like same like what happened in Tunisia, the division between the two factions of the regime, which is the army and the civilian. There is no compromise. So the army, as backbone of the regime, has distanced itself from the civilian, and later on created to make a change and topple this corrupt civilian. Of course, if we are talking about the economic dimension of this movement, we can understand, because Algeria is mainly a petroleum country. So since 2014, it was a high drop of oil price, and the country became in a hard situation, and even a decline in the level of standard of living and GDP per capita. So from 4,500 a few years later, it became around 3,000, and less later on also. So this situation, of course, create demand for a change. If we talk about the deficit also, from that point of time, Algeria is almost recording every year a deficit, both in trade and in government accounts and government budget. The cash reserve also has declined from 2013, now is around 50 billion, and is coming to the decline. So some experts, they will say that within 2 years, or maybe within 3 years maximum, if things has improved in terms of oil. So all the situation push the regime under the obligation to make some changes. As I say, Algeria is excessively dependent on energy sector. I mean, all other sectors are not able to contribute to the GDP in a great way. The informal sector, unfortunately, is very big. Some experts are putting it in the ratio of 73%. And we have almost 12 million workers. Almost 5 million of them, they are in the informal sector. So the
sorry, Yad, for interruption.
Yes. Yes.
Just wanted, like you have about 5 minutes to conclude your presentation.
Okay. I mean, if we look for all this indication and the indexes, we can say from the perspective of corruption, we are 106, competitiveness, we are 89, doing business, we are 157. So things are really, there is a dichotomy actually in the economy, in the economic model, compared between, I mean, in the discourse, official discourse, we are talking about the free market and pro-business economy, but in practicality, we are still Soviet and very statehood and interventionist bureaucracy during the implementation. So the economic model copied from the Soviet era is besieged, and we are not able to create wealth. So the Algeria economic system is heavy bureaucracy, 5 million in the informal sector, large state intervention, mainly is based on energy. So if we talk about the revival, I mean, there is maybe a few points that I will cite very fast here. So definitely we have to stop state involvement in economy. We have even a term for that. Everybody in Algeria is talking about الاقتصاد الإداري, economy run by administration. So this one, we have to make a huge change in the mentality of the regime, and a lot of education has to go with along with that. We are advocating also less bureaucracy, and we have almost also around 4 million working within the public sector, which is too much. And of course, we need also less regulation. so at least to make it fast for company creation. We have like Mr. Harmouzi said, the worker law is very heavy and is copied from the French model. The juridic system also is not playing his role in a good way. The land law also is making trouble also to the business. And of course, the same way, we have also two hiccups, which is the fiscal system and the financial system. The financial system, by all evaluation from the local expert, is even behind the standard that is happening in Morocco or in Tunisia. And some of our export is going through Tunisia because some of our businessmen, they feel that doing it through Tunisia, it's more flexible and much better. So this is generally the situation. And now, because Algeria has done the Hirak Act 1 in 2019, and it was a halt for this Hirak because of the COVID, but people are back in the street. Now this is the second week. The last Friday, it was the second Friday. And people, again, they are back in the street, and the regime is on the left and right looking for change, because as I say before, there is no room for brutality, there is no room for repression. They have to advocate some changes. And there is the agenda is, of course, political reform plus some economic reform. And thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Riyad. That was very helpful to understand the Algerian perspective here. You have highlighted many issues which are common in the region, heavy government, statist system where the government plays a heavy and dominating role. Also, you identified the parasite businesses, a huge informal sector, and a very huge public sector employment, and adding to the budget deficit. So there definitely issues of concern. We will move on to our third and last speaker of this webinar, and then we'll come back to you, Riyad, with further discussion. But let's hear from our friend from Tunisia, Dr. Ayman. Over to you, please.
Thank you very much.
Can you stop sharing the screen, please, Riyad?
Okay.
Can you?
Thank you. Yes, please. Ayman, we can hear you.
And do you see me?
Yes, I can see you. We can see you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. With your permission, I would like to start my talk with the focus on the current situation. I mean, post-COVID crisis. Of course, I will not fail to establish some significant links with the post-revolutionary context that is specific to Tunisia with its ongoing democratic transition. Tunisia is a part of a supply chain that has been broken globally. And this has led to our industries losing clients, losing suppliers, with a very significant figure. We lost almost 9% of our GDP in the last year. So it is a very difficult and a very challenging circumstantial crisis in Tunisia, a crisis that came to be added to two structural problems. The first one is related to our political transition with the political instability and the weakness of the institution that has come, that have come after the revolution. And the second structural problem is the economy, because if the revolution occurred, it occurred because of our inadequate economic system. I would like to say a few words about this inadequate economic system, which is characterized by a very high level of unemployment. And this is significant. And I think the example of the nature of our unemployment can give you a clear idea about our structural economic problems. In Tunisia, the old regime had a very simplistic understanding of the idea of equity and equality for the old regime, for Ben Ali's for Ben Ali and his regime. If you build a university in Tunis, you have to build other universities in internal areas such as Gafsa, Gabes, etc. So you end up with a strange situation where in rural areas you have many universities teaching literature, and with hundreds and even thousands of people with degrees in these specialties: literature, design, e-commerce, sometimes without internet connection in their environment. So this created a very serious and dangerous discrepancy between high expectations among these young people and what reality can provide. So we kind of destroyed the relationship with our youth, with their own, between our youth and their own reality and their own economic environment. We gave them degrees that are almost useless in their economic environment, but we created expectations among them. These expectations meant that they could no longer get back to their parents' activities. Most of them were rural and agricultural. They looked down. They started to look down on their parents' economic activity, with the result that this situation fueled anger and frustration. It would have been much wiser to provide them with training in order to make them better farmers, for example, because farming is not a bad job. It is not a small job. It is an excellent job, but they needed training they could not have because of this discrepancy between our education system and the needs of our economy. This gives you an idea about the structural problem of the economy. Then, of course, the revolution came. And when it came, it did not solve the economic and structural problems, but it created new ones because of the weakness and instability of the government and the political system in general. In other words, this anger and frustration I was talking about was translated in demands coming from these people asking the government to provide them with some assistance, with some protection, to almost to compensate them for their hard and difficult economic situation. This created a huge pressure upon the government, which was supposed to hire people because they were heroes of the revolution. This led to recruitment with no needs. So the public sector services witnessed a huge degradation. And of course, this was also translated in a huge increase in public spending and public debt, which weighs very heavily on the financial market. In addition to this public sector, we need also to talk about the problems that occurred within or with our strategic sectors. For example, phosphate, which is one of our main extractive products, has been hit very, very hard because the public-owned, the state-owned company that produces phosphate was considered in its region as a kind of cash cow. People wanted it to provide them with jobs, whether these jobs were economically sustainable or not. The trade unions and other forms of trade unions and other forms of organizations organize different kinds of protestation in order to force these companies especially in the extractive industries. I mentioned phosphate, but I can also mention gas and oil in the south, in order to provide works, jobs, support for these regions, for the young people there. The problem that the state was unable to protect these industries, these companies, so they kind of accepted to play this role, thinking that this is going to be a momentary situation and better days are going to come. But these better days never came. The dynamic is still going with very heavy risks on these sectors. They may simply fail. As another strategic sector, I would like also to mention the tourist sector, which is, of course, very important in Tunisia, representing almost 10% of our GDP. This tourist sector, of course, was hit very hard with the revolution, because no one wants to come to have holidays with a revolution, with a revolutionary context and stability. But also the situation was made worse by several terrorist attacks that occurred between 2011 and 2015. And as soon as we started picking up, we have been hit by Corona and the crisis that is related to this pandemic. This is an ugly situation, and when we say that the crisis is global, some people in Tunisia feel that this is rather comforting, because it means that we are not alone now in the crisis. Psychologically, it is comforting, but I think economically it is really bad. It may bear a heavy cost on our future, because now we know that no one is going to come for the rescue, because other countries, especially our democratic friends in Europe and North America and elsewhere, have their wounds to heal now. Secondly, this is very dangerous, because our fragile economic situation makes it more and more difficult to introduce the necessary reforms. In Tunisia, we know that we need reforms, but we know also that these reforms are going to be relatively painful, so we are delaying them as much as we can. Now we know that it is very hard now to delay reforms. We have huge pressure from inside, from outside, from the IMF, etc. And we are going to have to reform in the worst possible economic situation. And in order to do that, we need a very strong government that is capable of sustaining the social consequences of the reform, especially in the short run. It is very hard to imagine our current democratic system, with its weaknesses and instability, facing up to this challenge, which means that the economic crisis may translate into a very dangerous political crisis. And we have been successful in avoiding that for the moment, but the picture is not really reassuring. This is related to our transition and to our understanding of it. If we look at our transition, it was obvious that our transition was liberal in political terms. We wanted democracy. That was a kind of consensus. But in economic terms, it was anti-liberal. It was anti-liberal because our intellectuals interpreted this revolution as a kind of a reaction against the neoliberal world. This is very, very dangerous because in addition to the difficulties that are imposed by reality itself, we have to deal also with a kind of an intellectual environment that does not read reality as it is. When you listen to our intellectuals, you have the impression that Tunisia had been a liberal or a neoliberal state with a very limited government, without basic services in education or in healthcare. And in reality, this is ridiculous. Anyone who knows Tunisia knows how pervasive the government is and how heavy the bureaucracy has been. So in other words, we should be talking about reforms that go toward a more liberal situation, a more market-driven economy. Now we have to argue with many intellectuals in order to prove to them that far from being liberal, our system is really illiberal, and it is in the liberal direction we need to push. To cut a very long story short, I would say that collectively we are pushing towards the wrong direction. This makes the situation even more difficult because any government that wants to introduce any kind of reform in the right direction will be accused of being under the thumb of international institutions and the domination of capitalism and neoliberal institutions, and even it may be accused of not being patriotic and national enough. So, is there any reasons for hope? I think yes. In terms of our discourse, there is more and more people who say that we have to think about the right direction we need to be heading to. So there is some kind of new discourse breaking the monopoly of the old discourse about the role of the state and the responsibilities, the new responsibilities that the state should assume in our society. So this is a good sign. There is another good sign because with the coronavirus, some changes have taken place, especially at the small scale. Several enterprises are trying to adapt themselves to the new situation. There are many people who have tried to use the new possibilities of the digital world with the e-education, e-services, e-finances. So there are some changes at a relatively small level. At a bigger level, however, Tunisia needs investments, needs heavy investments, and these are difficult to come. First of all, and I would conclude with these points. First of all, the government does not have the money in order to invest heavily, for example, in improving our infrastructure and our education, simply because it doesn't have the money required. This year, for example, we have a gap in our budget, and this gap is very difficult to manage and to finance. The IMF is more and more reticent to cooperate with Tunisia, and I cannot really blame them because we have signed 2 agreements with the IMF during the last 10 years, and we failed to honor our engagements. In addition to that, Moody's has degraded our note to B3 with the negative perspective, which makes our possibility to finance our budget on the financial market more and more difficult. So the government cannot be counted upon to inject enough money for the rebuilding of the infrastructure and other necessary reforms. Investment must therefore come from the outside world. Tunisia has historically had a difficult task to convince these investments to come in Tunisia. Now we have a difficult task to convince them to stay because of the tensions that I've been mentioning, but also because with the new crisis, the new global COVID-related crisis, investments, even on the international level, are relatively scarce. Competition is very high. Many countries are trying to benefit from these possibilities and from the necessities, and many countries are trying to answer their needs for reform. So there is no possibility for Tunisia to business as usual, because there is a new normality. We need to adapt to this new situation. Are we going to do that or not? I doubt it, but there is some structural elements that may be in our favor. The most important one being the smallness of our economy. Our economy is small enough to be able to adapt more easily than we tend to think. More clearly, all the money we need in Tunisia is something like the money obtained by a company such as General Motors from the American government after the 2008 crisis. So we don't need that much money. So the smallness of our economy may be our best element. I don't know whether this is a hopeful note to conclude with, but that's the best I can provide. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. I mean, this was very enlightening, a very informative talk about Tunisia. You highlighted pressures of for reform. You highlighted particularly the intellectual resistance to reforms ideas, and how intellectuals perceive the revolution as a sort of a revolution against the new liberal ideas or free market ideas, if I were to use that word. You also, like two other speakers, you highlighted the role of the government and commented the government role seems to be very pervasive at the moment. So very interesting thoughts. I will move on to questions now. I have
just to remind you, Ali, I will be cut off from internet in a very short time. So if you miss me, I will come back very quickly in 3 minutes.
I appreciate. Thank you. We will look forward to see you back.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we can continue discussion. There is one question about the role of the private sector, which is posted here. And I'll hold on the question for Ayman when he joins back.
No, I'm here for the moment.
Okay. So the question perhaps to you is asked by Mohammed Amin. And Mohammed Amin, by way of introduction, is chairman of our network, Islamic Liberty Network. He asked this question: how easy is it for foreign companies to establish subsidiaries in Tunisia or buy land in Tunisia? Do you get that question? Can you answer this question?
Yes, I can. it used to be much easier under the regime of Ben Ali. Now it is increasingly hard because of the instability, especially, and this is relatively paradoxical, especially if we are talking about big investments with labor-intensive activities. This is paradoxical because those are precisely what Tunisia needs. But in order to implement such programs, such plans, you need to cooperate with the government. And the government in Tunisia is relatively short in its life expectations. So no officials are ready to take the necessary risk, to assume the necessary responsibilities in providing big companies and the big investments with the right answers to their requirements. There is another source of difficulties. After the revolution, people started to blame the government for almost anything. For example, for selling land with the underrated price. So our officials nowadays are really very hesitant to take any courageous and risky decision. So if there is any kind of risk, the government and the officials will be really very hesitant. The third and last element I want to highlight is the role of the media. The media in Tunisia has given itself the task of controlling everything, of making sure that any question is any question becomes controversial and an issue of public concern. So if there is the slightest problem with any of the clauses of the activities, and even if there is just doubt about something, it becomes very easily an issue of public concerns with very violent public reactions. These are not very good conditions for investment.
Thank you. This was a quite elaborate answer. Shall I move to the next question here? This is concerning the private sector. So maybe I can request Riyadh to comment on it. The question is in the Q&A box here. And has asked by Hasinullah Khan from Pakistan. And he's asking this question: is the indigenous private sector in position to cope with all the internal and external economic challenges, especially in the perspective of COVID-19 challenges? How would you like to answer that, Riyadh?
Thank you for the question. Actually, I remember one joke from President Reagan I saw in the YouTube. So he say, when the government shut down, nobody will feel that government is absent. So the COVID situation actually, I think it gives in many countries, and one of them is Algeria, that when the government was absent and all his bureaucrats are in confinement, a lot of activity, even the president, in one of his media intervention, has highlighted that, saying that it was a lot of activity because there is no the regulation was at its lowest level. The control from the government was at its lowest level. So they cannot bother the people, they're already confined, they cannot bother them too much. So we have seen a lot of, how to say, example of private activity, including making masks, making a corridor of hygiene, and so on, this kind of activity. And I think people has understand that one of the major role of the state and government has just to create positive roles for business than be involved in business. Unfortunately, Algeria, still our main income from hard currency is from the energy sector. And we are talking about our numbers are hovering for the last few years between 97% to 98%. And even the 2% remaining still, I mean, from the 2% remaining, which is not directly from oil and gas sector, part of that 2% remaining is coming also from byproduct from oil and gas. So the contribution of now the government has set a target. He wants just to move to $5 billion US outside the energy sector, outside the oil and gas sector. So the contribution of the private sector in the model of Algeria is still very, very limited. And of course, as I say, there is a dichotomy. The discourse is a liberal discourse. He wants the people to be to take care of their future, of their wealth. They want people to contribute in the creation, but there is a lot of hiccups in terms of implementation of this kind of beautiful discourse. Thank you.
Thank you, Riyadh. Is there one question I wanted to ask, Ayman, if you can still, I can still see you and you're available.
Yes, 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 I'm still here.
There's a question about the academic attitude, since you also a professor, and you highlighted about the role of intellectuals and how intellectuals perceive. And I think some of us also highlighted, the role of education and role of ideas in when we talk about reforms, you have to have some social support for reforms. Let's say, more role for the private sector, less role for the government, smaller size for the size of the government. All these ideas need some kind of education, some intellectual support. From your presentation, it seems that there's very little of it. Is this impression correct? And what needs to be done to improve I would say, to increase the intellectual support for important economic changes?
Intellectually, it is very hard to fight against the domination of a kind of discourse that starts almost every speech by saying the state must or the government should. This is a tradition in Tunisia, and this tradition really became predominant after the revolution, because everyone now is kind of pointing at the government and asking it to assume its responsibility. And believe me, it is almost painful to come up with a different story. It is really very, very hard. How to
Well, I think we have lost Ayman for now. He already told that it will happen, so he'll join us in a couple of minutes. And in the meanwhile, Riyadh, I would like to redirect this question to you, because you're not only in the private sector and running a business, but also you are co-founder of IX Center in Algeria. And so maybe could you tell us something more about the work which HIEC Center is doing in especially creating an intellectual support for the kind of ideas and issues you have highlighted? Riyadh, can you hear us? Can you hear me? Muhammad Amin is here. Maybe Amin wants to say something. Please, Amin.
Assalamu alaikum, Ali. I was particularly
Walaikum
struck
assalam.
while Ayman is away by the point that he was making about the intellectual attitude in Tunisia that the state must do everything. And I think what this shows is the importance of what the Islam and Liberty Network is trying to do by promoting a different way of thinking about the economy and the relationship of the private sector and the public sector, and the need for free market capitalism to be understood and widely adopted in OIC countries. So it's a really important reminder of the challenge that we face and the fact that the real battle is the battle of ideas.
Yeah, thank you for, thank you for emphasizing this point. And certainly this confirms the need of the work we are doing. And hopefully people like Ayman and Riyadh and Nuh earlier can actually help in advancing these ideas in a local context, because many times what happens is that as he was also highlighting that these ideas are perceived coming from outside, coming from so-called Western institutions or even so-called neoliberal institutions, and there is no immediate recognition that there are some universal truths in how economies needs to be done and how people can be made more prosperous, and there is a resistance to these ideas, which perhaps make reforms more difficult than it should be. I will wait for about 2 more minutes. Hopefully our speakers can join back here, or if anyone else wants to participate in the meanwhile, we have some space here. You can raise your hand or type in the chat box, and I will let you in to speak. We have had participants, very committed participants from, I must say, different regions of the world, all the way from North America to Southeast Asia, and of course, the Middle East and North Africa. It's a good representation of all time zones here today, particularly our friends from Malaysia, very late there this time of the hour. Riyadh, I see you back here. Can you listen to us? Okay, I received a message on WhatsApp from Riyadh that the internet issues are there. So I guess that we can actually conclude the webinar here. We had three powerful presentations, highly informative presentations from Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, talking about the economic challenges in these three countries, and also not just economic challenges, but also the sort of institutional environment as well as the intellectual environment around these issues in the countries. We heard our speakers talking about what needs to be done. I think there were some common issues, common problems, heavy role of the government in particular, and how a private initiative and market needs to get more space in the economic growth and economic challenges. How heavy these countries, how heavy is the government in these countries, both in terms of the budget spending, but also in terms of the share in the employment. And certainly when you have a government, when you have millions of people working in the government, it becomes very hard to reform, because those are the people who might have to be downsized or restructured as a result of reform. And certainly they are not going to welcome the change. Change is never easy, particularly when you are coming from a background in which these countries have experience. But as Amin rightly highlighted, we at Islam and Liberty Network are committed to advance and promote these ideas, which we believe are helpful and conducive for growth and prosperity for our societies, particularly Muslim majority countries. We continue to contribute in this debate through our research and through programs like this. And hopefully those who have joined us will continue to support through your participation. So with this, I conclude this webinar. I thank our speakers again, Riyadh, Ayman, and Noor, and all the participants who have taken time. For now, I wish you a good day or good evening, and see you hopefully again in a webinar.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Umar, for the invitation. And good evening for everybody. Bye-bye.